So yeah, for today's deck guide thingy, my attempt, I was thinking, yeah, going through Fairy Forestcraft. That's another. Just kind of I'm not as confident how much I know this deck compared to stuff like Artifact Portal and others. I'm still not particularly great at playing it, but I think I can probably. As I said, this will be a joint learning experience. Also, I need to edit the deck slightly because I think I did pick up another. Yes. So starting now, we are going to be talking about going through the Fairy Forestcraft deck. This is a new deck that's been played a fair amount in the current meta. It's mostly built around this card, Nobilis, but it's also just a generally aggressive style of deck. It's got a lot of ways to. The main goal, the main goal in abstract, is just to make a wide board whilst chipping away at your opponent until they can't really stop you, just overwhelming them with stuff. So the main card the deck is built around is Nobilis, Sable Lolly Queen, which is 4-play 0.22, obviously a bit low on the stats. You've got Fanfare, put 2 fairies into your hand. Then you give +1/+0 and the following effect to all allied fairies with 1 attack in play and in your hand. Now, in play and in hand is important, because a lot of similar effects usually just either in play or just in hand, or this is both. Because this means you can actually, if you've played out a bunch of fairies and got a bunch of fairies already on the board that you've had on from the previous turn, you can obviously play Nobilis, and she'll buff the fairies on the board provided they have 1 attack, so you haven't evolved them or buffed them from another effect. And then they can also hit face or trade higher with opponents. Obviously, anyone who's played Forestcraft for any length of time knows fairies are just 1-play 0.11 followers that do a lot of fairy followers interact with. And also, the main part of the aggression she gives is giving them any fairy she buffs. She gives last words, deal 2 damage to the enemy leader, which starts adding a lot more damage. And on her own, even if you don't have any fairies on hand or on board, that's basically that's 4 damage. And that's 2 damage with every additional fairy. And then she's got a pretty strong evolve effect as well, where she gives -1/-1 to all enemy followers, which is good for just dealing with the board an opponent have, good against forest decks, because they'll also have a lot of 1 attack, 1 defense followers on the board already. And recovers 2 play points, which defunds some of that expensive cost she has, because obviously she's a 4-play 0.22. So on base, that's not particularly good, but with Evolve, it's on par, whilst also having that board clear effect. And then a lot of the rest of the deck is cards to generate fairies, like Blast Fairy, your primary one is the stuff like Aqua Fairy, which puts a fairy into your hand with Fanfare and Last Words. And then you've got the Flying Mistletoe Squirrel, a new card that's just Fanfare, put 2 fairies into your hand with an enhance that can kill your opponent in a pinch, but you usually won't. Not worth saving the card in hand for, unless you're overflowing with cards in hand, and the fairies will be more of a problem. Generally, you want to play this when you can, so that you get those fairies, and then you can boost them with Nobilis. And then you've got Blast Fairy, which is a nice little card. It's a 1-play 0.01, so it has no attack, but it does put a fairy into your hand and deals X damage to your follower, which is after when you put the fairy into your hand, so it'll always deal, unless you unless your hand is full, it'll always deal full and has no fairies in it. It'll always deal like 1 damage, but then it'll do damage equal to the number of fairies in your hand. So that can be a very especially if you've started stocking up fairies from other sources, that can be a very useful way to like clear an annoying enemy followers just very cheaply and efficiently. And still often worth playing if you don't have like an Aqua Fairy in hand on turn 1 and you have like a Phantom Bloom Predator or this is Woodland Pest Control, but I have the Umamusume collab version, which is Silent Suzuka. Yeah, Woodland Pest Control to bounce it back to your hand. And so we'll go through that card in a bit more detail later. And like most of the other cards are kind of just general more ways to add damage and finishes, like Shining Valkyrie. It's probably not. So there's a lot of flexibility in a lot of these cards. PSI is usually run mainly because she just synergizes well with chipping your opponent down and also getting more evos out of your board. Odd Shining Valkyrie is an option to give you some extra reach, because she's a 5/2/5. Go through PSI first. So PSI is a 4 point 3/3 with whenever an allied follower evolves, deal 2 damage to all enemy followers and 1 damage to the enemy leader. So she can add some power onto any evolves you have. You mainly play her with this enhanced slot active, so you mainly play her on 6. She recovers an evo point and also 4 play points. So she's effectively only. So if you play her for 6, she's effectively only 2 play points, and you get an evo point back. So that's very important with Rain. So I have the special alt-art version Rain that I got lucky for, but it's the normal one. Who's a 2 play point 2/2, who, like, the main reason you have her is you evolve her and she evolves another allied Forestcraft follower. So you basically get 2 evolves for 1 there. So that works nicely with PSI because then you get her effect triggering twice. And she's also got Invocation, so you don't really need to run 3 of her. You can only run 2 of her. 1 maybe, but you probably want at least 2. Just because it's nice to have more than 1 of her. It's like whenever you play the 4th card of your turn, you invoke her where she enters the battlefield, enters play from your deck, returns to your hand and change cost to 1, which is another slightly important thing because the other main like finisher of the deck. Oh, sorry, I was going on a tangent with Shining Valkyrie. No, I haven't got to Shining Valkyrie yet. Is Tam Lin, who's 3 play point 2/2 with fanfare, destroy an enemy follower, which is pretty good, pretty strong. That's a pretty solid 3 play point 2/2. But then he's got these additional effects. Whereas if at least 10 allied Forestcraft followers have left play this match, you gain +2/+2 and Storm. Then if 20 have left play this match, you get some +4/+4 instead of +2/+2. So if you get that's something that Rain helps with because she enters the battle. Because when you invoke her, she enters play and then leaves play, so that takes that up, along with all the fairies you're playing and anything you're bouncing. So you can get him to 10 pretty easily and then get to 20 not too late after that. 20 is a bit harder, but 10 is what you'll most likely hit. So it'll most likely be a 4/4 Storm, but importantly destroys an enemy follower when you play him. So you can quite happily destroy an annoying ward follower. And then so may as well go through the Shining Valkyrie now, which is another Storm follower finisher kind of thing, whose main gimmick is that she has strike, gain +1/+0 for every 2 allied fairies in play or in your hand. So obviously if you're putting a lot of fairies into your hand, or even in play, because she counts those as well, she can hit for quite a lot of damage. You'll probably hit for like so getting her to like +2 is pretty easy, because it's pretty easy to have 4 fairies in hand, because she gives you 2, so you only need 2 to begin with. Of any more than that, you're going to be might be having some like hand size troubles, so always be worth it. The fairies she particularly puts into your hand are quite handy, because they get a fanfare that deals 3 damage to a random enemy follower. Again, another way to... This is one of the main strengths of the deck, is it's very hard to build a board against, because they have a lot of ways of clearing the board through Tamlin, PSI, Nobilis' Evo, and Shining Valkyrie's Fairies. So they can quite happily they don't have to trade anything, they can just kill your board and then go straight for your face. And also, she's another follower that gives you 2 Evos for 1, so if it's turn 7, you can play PSI, then play Shining Valkyrie and evolve her, and that's 2 Evos as well, to add on to her damage. And also, Evoing her is good because it gets you more attack, and she's a big finisher. And obviously that means she makes 3 total fairies, but you might have to trade, if you trade like the evolved one, then obviously that doesn't count when she actually attacks to get rid of a block of that, obviously doesn't count when she goes face. So a fairly simple evolve, usually just evolve smack face with Shining Valkyrie. So Cosmos Fang is kind of like more of a backup plan more than anything in this deck. Might as well go with him. So she's a 6 play point 5/6 with ambush for a turn, just a turn. She doesn't stick around. He doesn't stick around. And at the end of the turn, she returns all other allied followers to hands and restores that many restores X defense to your leader, where X equals the number of cards returned to a player's hand during your turn. So it can be so it counts both your cards and your opponent's cards. And of course, on Evolve, she returns all other followers to their player's hand, so that's yours and your opponent's. That's kind of like one of the main reasons she's put in the deck, is mostly as a control tool / backup plan, because if you can bounce... If opponent's made a scary board, there's not really that many scary boards that like can avoid being bounced back to the player's hands. I think maybe, unless it's like a board made of amulets, like Haven, like Sanctuary Haven, well, Crystallize Haven. Crystallize Haven does. Like, they can prep a turn, and Cosmos Fang won't really do much against that because she doesn't bounce amulets. But she can't stop them from doing a big OTK Skullfane turn. She's also got Strike, gain plus X plus 0 until the end of turn, where X again is the same number of cards returned to play. So that's more something that you play. So that's that's the kind of like extra threat / win condition that she provides, because she's an ambush follower, and you've probably evolved her to bounce your opponent's board. She's an 8 health ambush follower, which can be pretty hard to deal with. There's not like... They need to have something that randomly targets, which Portal has a lot of, but you do have an option to stop that a bit later, that I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, so you can use her to just bounce an enemy's board and heal, just to kind of like stall for a turn, so you can accumulate more damage in hand from Tamlins or Phantom Blue Predators. We'll get to that in a second. Shining Valkyries, all that good stuff. And then if she happens to survive a turn, you can probably kill your opponent with her, because at the very least she's a 7/8 body alongside any other damage you can pull off, but if you've got any kind of bounce in hand from something like Woodland Pest Control or a Phantom Bloom Predator, then that's obviously going to add some more damage, add a lot more damage. Let's go over Woodland Pest Control, or in this case Silent Suzuka if you've done the Uma Musume collab, which was quite a while ago now, god. This is a card that's mainly just played for its Accelerate effect. It's Accelerate 1, return an allied follower or amulet to your hand, put a random Forestcraft follower from your deck into your hand. So you use that to bounce something that you want to get more value out from playing again. So that could be a Nobilis to get more fairies and get more pings off. It could be Pierce Eye to get her back and play her the next turn. Could be almost anything in your deck, really. Phantom Bloom Predator for more damage, Aqua Fairy for more fairies, Helper Kitten for some card draw and board control. Pretty much everything apart from, say, Cosmos Fang is a good target to get, and maybe Shining Valkyrie is a good target to hit with this. You don't want to be, it is a bit of a weird planning moment because this is one of your cheaper bounce options. So you want to make sure and this deck doesn't run a whole lot of bounce options. It runs Phantom Bloom and Silent Suzuka, and Cosmos Fang, I guess. That's pretty much it. So whilst you do kind of want to use it to tutor more, because you always want more Forestcraft followers in your hand, you do want to make sure, like, if you have a card like Pierce Eye or Tamlin, so obviously you can attack, even if you just have the one Tamlin, you can attack, you can play it, blow something up, attack, then bounce it with Silent Suzuka, not Silent Suzuka, Woodland Pest Control, sorry, and then play him again to attack again, and that's like 7 play points, but can still be a lot of damage, especially if you've got Cosmos Fang in play, which does lead from a 6 to a 7 turn play. But yeah, so you'll mostly just be accelerating it. The body is okay. It's a 3/3 storm that AoEs the board, so useful in a pinch, but usually you'll just be playing it as the accelerate. So going on to Phantom Bloom Predator, it's a fairly simple card. This is the Battle Pass Alt Art version. The regular version is like a more gnarly, werewolfy type dude. That yeah, it's basically if you have it bounces specifically one. Yeah, it bounces specifically one play point followers, so it can't. This is important that it's original cost. So if you have a one point note, if you have a Rain and her cost has been reduced to 1 from her invocation, when you play her and she's in play, she goes back to being a 2 cost. So Phantom Bloom cannot bounce her, because that cost reduction doesn't persist outside of that initial time you play her. And then yeah, she returns 1 to her hand and she gains +1/+0 and it gains +1/+0 and Storm. So a fairly simple, you bounce anything like any of your 1 play point options, which can be any of these, or a fairy, and you get a 3/2 Storm, which can obviously add up to a lot of damage, especially if you get to play her fairly early on. And then yeah, going through most of your 1 play point options is a Aqua Fairy to make fairies, a Blast Fairy to make fairies and deal damage. Helper Kitten is a 1/1 rush, which if you've played at least 2 other cards this turn, she draws a card and she gains a damage shield, which means she can bump something and then you can bounce her again. And then there's Miracle Harvest, which summons a fairy that if at least 5 allied followers have left play this match, gets evolved. So that's a pretty easy condition to fill. That again can rack up some damage, more procs of Pierce Eye. eye for just 1 play point, which is nice. And then if you've got to that 10 count, then you also restore 2 HP and draw a card. It's like if you've got, usually you want to wait until you at least get the free Evo on it. But if you've got, say, Phantom Bloom Predator on play and this is your only 1-drop, that's perfectly fine to play it and then bounce it, because not only do you then have your Phantom Bloom Predator active, but you then have a fairy in hand which contributes to, which you can then buff with Nobilis, rather than just having an evolved fairy, which might be better, but might be better for trading, but might be but won't like contribute any damage to your opponent's face. Obviously, if you can like play that and evolve that, then play Nobilis, then you. Oh yeah, if you play that, and remember that Nobilis only buffs things with 1 attack, so the evolved fairy that you get from this doesn't actually get her buff to get the last words. And what? So the other 1-drop. Okay, well, hi, Daku. Glad you could join in, Daku. And so we're just kind of whizzing through explaining this deck. So this is Autumn Leaf Man is kind of played for 2 reasons. One, he's at 1 play point 1/2, Goblin stats, fairly good playable if you want to play an early aggressive deck. His fanfare can be quite vital because there's quite a lot of effect damage in the meta right now, especially from Portalcraft. Like, Portalcraft relies a lot on... It is pretty good. He's just a little leafy friend. I mean, it's the... yeah, well, you can't really see in the deck view screen. It's a bit awkward. But, yeah, so if you trigger his fanfare from having 2 other cards play this turn, he has a very powerful... He gives everything immunity to effect damage. He gives you all your allied followers immunity to effect damage. It doesn't give your face immunity, it's only followers. And this is incredibly important to deal with Portalcraft more than anything, but can also help against Runecraft and generally a lot of other decks, but Portalcraft is like the big one that you think of, because Portalcraft wants to clear boards using yeah, Portalcraft wants to clear boards using Full Blast Gunner's effect or Realmier's effect. And if you're immune to those effects, they're going to actually have a lot harder time to clear with your board. They might be able to, but it'll probably also be the hurdle that stops them from being able to hit your face. Because they need to clear your board to hit... Because Artifact Portalcraft needs to clear your board to hit your face with cannon artifacts and artifact impulse. That's the main ways they're going to kill someone, is with those effects. And if you have Autumn Leafman effect and they can't efficiently clear your board, they might not even be able to hit your face with those effects. So that's why there's a very powerful card in that matchup. So you might even have 3 of them. So this deck, and I think the last card to go over with is Forest Merchant, which is a 2 play point 1/2 with fanfare, draw a card, which is already pretty nice. And then if you've got 2 other cards played this turn, you give +1/+0 to all allied followers. So this is kind of like another way to put on a lot more aggression. Because it can be very easy, especially if you've got, say, a couple of fairies already in play, or a Phantom Bloom Predator or something. You can, like, quite easily proc this effect on turn 4. And if your opponent hasn't been clearing your early board, that can be quite a lot of more damage. Note it does hit herself. It's not other, it's all. So you just become a 2/2. So she can quickly, so Forest Merchant is another powerful card that can quickly snowball an early board if your opponent hasn't been able to clear it. is especially good against more passive early decks like Crystallized Havencraft or Spell Boost Runecraft. And maybe Artifact Portalcraft if you're lucky. The Artifact Portal can have some trouble dealing with boards early on if they don't draw specific cards. They need to make sure they have like stuff like Realmia. Like they've got a fair few options, but they've also got a decent chance of not having those options. So if they don't, you can quite easily punish those kinds of bad draws with this kind of like overwhelming early force of Forest Merchants and Phantom Bloom Predator just doing extra storm damage. So yeah, that's just a general look at the cards. There is a few other options. I've been seeing people put in, like Metatron is always an option in almost any kind of mid-rangey or late-game deck. Generally anything that is even like pure aggro decks because she pings base. So Metatron is just generally a useful option. Because that 1 damage and that heal for 1 can be pretty handy. A 1/4 ward is actually obviously quite hard to deal with, so that's a follower that can stick around and possibly get buffed by Forest Merchant, which can be pretty useful. And ramping is just having access to the ramp is just generally pretty good. So Metatron's a pretty solid option for the deck. As I don't really know how to like swap out what cards to swap out. Like you could probably like PSI isn't most that important at 3, so that's a card you can take out. Shining Valkyrie is a bit clunky. I'm actually going to take one out now because I need to remember to do that later, because you only really need one. You only really want to play this card when it's killing your opponent, or it's one of those cards that you only play if it's killing your opponent or saving your life. That's the only 2 situations you really play it. Or you just think like killing your opponent, saving your life, or you think your opponent can't stop it, can't like deal with it because it's a 4/7 storm that just blew up their board. So other useful cards. Not there, not there. Adherent can be quite useful, but not really. I think that's more for a yeah, Adherent's more for a more control-y type deck. You're not really going to use it, but it's still an ambush follower that again can stick around, get buffed by Forest Merchant, and you can, even if you're not like playing around it drawing lots of cards, you can still evolve. It still synergizes with Nobilis as well. Is Nobilis's Evo as well. Obviously it needs to be in play beforehand, so Adherent of Annihilation is a card you can put in the deck, but I wouldn't recommend it, but I might be wrong. Again, I'm not like the most knowledgeable of this deck. Slade can be kind of useful, but I don't think I see anyone running Slade, so I don't think it's a good choice, even if it does kind of look like a good idea for getting more cards played per turn, because obviously you can like you could do a turn 3 play of like Slade, a 1-drop, and then Forest Merchant that's been discounted. Yeah, so I can see Slade being useful in deck. I might have to look at because I know there was a recent JCG today, but I haven't really looked at the Fairy Forest decks that are running there. Uranus always a good tech choice in this meta. Not like, yeah, the deck doesn't draw a lot of cards, so getting to 20 cards or less isn't going to be usable. But if you find yourself really needing the banish against Portal or Shadow, then he's pretty good to have like one of. But I wouldn't recommend, but not like a core part of the deck. Angel's Blessing is always a good card if you just find yourself needing more card draw, especially if you're having a lot of trouble going second. Breezy Elf could be quite interesting because you get that fairy that has the evolve on it. Again, works well with PSI, but this deck isn't really an evo deck. You put Breezy Elf into your deck, it's more because you're making a deck built around evolve effects. Where with this, in this, the only real like evolve synergy is with PSI. And it says others. None of those cards. Those. Almost. I have seen some decks running Brilliant Fairy, but I think Shining Valkyrie's been run beforehand. Like it's 4.34, give +1/+1 to another, I thought it was. If 2 other cards are played this turn, give +1/+1 and Storm to all allied fairies. So you can, like, especially if you've got some buff fairies from Nobilis in hand, that can make some pretty strong, or a pretty strong play of just like play 2 buffed fairies and Brilliant Fairy, and then you have and then yeah, or like 2 or 3 fairies, and then Brilliant Fairy, and then you hit them with a decently strong board that also has the Last Words effect as well. So Brilliant Fairy is another option, again probably replacing Shining Valkyrie. Trick isn't played, Resto isn't played, Territory played. I said Shining Valkyrie is mostly just a one-off. I think the... So yeah, that's the thing I was editing is I pulled another Cosmos Fang. But you can add in there. Carbuncle isn't really played in this deck. Heck, like you can, but I probably wouldn't. Maybe if you just want to get some more Evo points you find it struggling. Maybe if you're like low on, you have less PSIs but more Carbuncle, you could probably do that. Got King of Vines was still in rotation. It's interesting that it's not played in the deck, but I can see why. And Wooltusk Mammoth is basically just for an evil. There's a lot of decks in this meta you can like take in a singular ultimate Bahamut in case you think, but it's not really that great an option because this deck again is very aggressive. If you get to the point where Baha would help you, then you've probably gotten too late and already lost. Probably unlikely, so it's not really worth putting that. So yeah, that's a fairly speedy deck summary.